Hello, I'm Stephen James, and today I would like to speak with you a little bit about an important aspect of characterization called status. Now, in every social encounter, one person either has or is vying for more dominance or more submission. This is status. Now, there are three types of status we'll talk about: relational status, situational status, and positional status. But it's important as we look at writing, especially novels, screenplays, short stories, it's vital that we remember to keep status in mind. Now, very few people teach status, uh, and yet it's one of the most important aspects of characterization. So, what is status? Well, when someone has more dominance in a situation, or maybe a boss has a higher status in position, or a father has a higher status to his daughter, let's say, one person is in a place or position where they have more dominance. Now, dominant people tend to pause more. They tend to control the situation, and they tend to control the conversation. It's important to remember that stillness is power. So one time I was teaching on status, and this lady came up to me and she said that her father, when he was in the military and he was promoted to colonel, the general told him, "Now I want you to learn to smoke." And I thought, well, why would you want to learn to smoke? I asked this lady, and she said, well, because the general said that any time that he didn't know the answer to a question, he could just light up and smoke and think about what to say. That's a high status move. And in movies, we often see people smoking, especially those in authority and those in power. It's because that stillness creates control, and that control raises status and dominance. So people who have lower status tend to look down more. People with higher status tend to keep eye contact. Now, eye contact can be a very powerful way of manipulating, control, or even leading to seduction. So if you have really long eye contact with someone, so 10 minutes, 10 seconds, or more, very often that will either lead to a fight or jumping into the sack together, because status is such a powerful way, eye contact is such a powerful way of creating and maintaining status. So people with high status tend to use the names of the people that they're talking with more. If you're trying to create higher status for a character in your book, you might have that character use someone else's name. It's a way of controlling, again, what happens. Also, those in high status will often use comfortable gestures with both hands, or maybe just with one hand. But if you find that someone is folding their arms, that can easily be concealment. And concealment always lowers status. So someone fumbling around by their mouth, covering their mouth as they speak, closing their eyes, looking down, having their feet pointed inward, all of these show lower status. Now, in your stories, you're going to want your character to have a variety of different situations or positions or relationships where he or she can show a variety of status levels. So for instance, let's say that you're writing about your character and she comes to an alleyway filled with 6 guys step out, and they have pipes and chains, and they step out and they say, "Give us your money." She would be in a position or a situation that has very low status. Same with, let's say, your boss. You would have a lower positional status, or as I mentioned earlier, a father and his daughter, higher relational status. But choice is always more important than relationship, position, or situation. So if this character that we have in the story looks around at these people who are surrounding her with these weapons, and she says, "All right, the first one to come forward gets embarrassed, the second one goes to the hospital. Who wants to come forward?" So suddenly readers are like, "Oh, wow, well, she has, maybe she has skills in karate or whatever it might be." And so she flips the status. Same with if you were in a lower position, like if you're not intimidated by your boss, or if you talk back to your boss in a way that shows that you're not going to be lowered or diminished. That could raise your status, as long as it's not sarcastic, which could lower your status. And relationally, in one of my stories, Patrick Bowers, he's the hero, he's an FBI agent, and he has very high status in most situations. When he's at a crime scene, he will never back down, he will never give up, he will never give in. But when he's with his stepdaughter, he doesn't always know what to say. So she's a vegan, and he's always trying to get her to eat meat. And one day he says to her, if God didn't want us to eat cows, he wouldn't have covered them with meat. And she says, he covered you with meat. And Patrick has no idea what to say, because she flips the tables on him, she pulls the rug out, and ends up with higher status because of her choice. So choice, more than relationship, position, or situation, can raise the status of a character. Now, as I mentioned earlier, stillness is power. And so if you're trying to create a moment in your story where a character has higher status, slow them down. For this, for example, let's say that you have a woman and she's running for her life from the killer who's in the house. And so she runs through the forest, and she looks back, and she runs again, and she stumbles and runs. And the guy just kind of steps out of the house and slowly starts walking in a movie. Why do you think that they don't have him rushing? Well, it's because it would lower his status. So somehow, as she's running along, she gets a quarter of the way through the forest, falls down, looks up, and somehow he's in front of her. We don't know how, but he's somehow in front of her, because even though he's walking slower, he gets up in front, because they want to create that moment of stillness or slowness or status. So if you have a villain that you're trying to make more frightening, don't speed him up, slow him down. You can also raise status by allowing your character to turn the other cheek, or sacrifice for someone else. It could be a physical sacrifice, stepping in front of a bullet. It could be a financial sacrifice, paying off the debt of someone who can never repay him. It could be any type of sacrifice. So that will raise the status in the eyes of your readers of that character. Or turning the other cheek, so someone could slap him, he could turn the other cheek, that would raise his status. So, for instance, I watched one movie, and in the movie there was a Palestinian terrorist who was captured by the Israeli Secret Service, or the Mossad. And they bring him in to question him. When they bring him in, he has his shirt off, his hands are like chained above his head or something like this, and the interrogator walks in with a clipboard. And he says, tell us when the next terrorist attack is going to happen. And the guy says nothing. He smacks him upside the face. And he says, tell us when the terrorist attack is. He smacks him again. And so in this situation, who has the higher status? Well, the man in control. I mean, the other guy has very low status because he's chained up to the wall and stuff like this. You're chained up to the ceiling. But he hits him one more time, and finally the guy who's chained up says, your nose. The interrogator says, what? He says, your nose. What are you talking about? He says, there's something hanging from your nose. The guy turns around, kind of does this, and walks back to finish the interrogation. Now, who exhibited higher self-control? Who has higher status? The guy who was in the position of low status. But you see how his self-control, his self-restraint raised his status. So status is also used with every verb that you choose. So for instance, if you're having a character walk across the room, and you say that she strutted across the room. Well, when you strut, you're drawing attention to yourself. So is that high or low status? Well, since you're showing that you need the attention of others, it's actually lower status. Or let's say that you write that she stomps across the room. Well, stomping across the room would show lack of self-control because you're angry and you're stomping off, and so that would actually lower your status. But let's say that she strides across the room. To stride is to walk with confidence, and so that actually raises her status. So status not only has to do with word choice, but even punctuation. So for instance, If you were writing, I know you heard me, exclamation point, right? Step away from her, exclamation point. If you don't, I'm going to make sure you regret it, exclamation point. Well, if you have the person yell all of those, it actually shows lack of self-control. But let's say that you had the person just say those words with a period. I know you heard me, period. Step away from her, period. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it, period. So that shows more control. So if you're looking for a way to raise the status of a character, have them yell less. Have them use fewer exclamation marks, points, exclamation marks. Or points, I guess it's points and it's question marks. In one of my books, I was revising it one time and I thought, it seems like there are a lot of those exclamation marks in this, or points, whichever one it is, in this book. And I found that I deleted more than 400 of them, and so it actually, there were a couple that I needed to actually take out of that revision. But I found that it actually helped maintain the status of my main character. So showing self-control, showing stillness raises status. So for instance, in one of my books, I'm going to read you an excerpt from The Rook, and it has to do with Patrick Bowers, this FBI agent. Now remember, to create great characters, you need to show your character in a variety of situations, positions, and relationships where they have different status, just like a real person in real life. So for instance, if you're always impatient with your wife, and then impatient with the cab driver, and then the hotel concierge. If you're impatient with everyone, it actually creates a one-dimensional character, cardboard character, flat character, because you're actually showing the exact same amount of dominance in every situation. But let's say that with one character you have lower status. So you want to create an interesting character, you have his buddy, they have equal status, they kind of banter back and forth. With his love interest, he might have equal, or he might have actually lower status. But in a relationship, say with children at home, high relational, but boss, and all of these show a variety of status. So multivariate status is the way to multidimensional characterization. So let me read you from The Rook. And this has to do with Patrick Bowers, who is a man of high status. As I mentioned, at a crime scene or with a villain, he's always going to have higher status. But he meets this detective Dunn. Now, Detective Dunn is a street smart detective, and he has high status as well. So this is what happens. Dunn stepped close enough for me to smell his garlicky breath. Now, to get in the face of an FBI agent, that's a high status move. This is my city. The next time you and your pencil-pushing lawyer buddies from Quantico decide to stick your nose into an ongoing investigation, at least have the courtesy to go through the proper channels. Now that's a very high status thing to say to an FBI agent. And so I struggled with, how do I have Patrick respond? If Patrick backs up, who has the higher status? Detective Dunn. I actually shatter Patrick's status if I would have him back up and be intimidated at this time. On the other hand, if he gets in Detective Dunn's face, if he yells at him, that would show a lack of self-control, and it would actually lower his status. And it could take literally hundreds of pages to regain the status of this main character of my story. So I thought, well, what am I going to do with this? And it took me a long time to try and figure out, but I finally wrote this. I'd suggest you back away, I said. Now. He backed up slowly. Okay, so Patrick shows self-control. He doesn't back up. He doesn't give in. He doesn't respond with anger. And he says, I suggest you back away, I said. Now. And Dunn backs up. Now when Dunn backs up and Patrick shows a self-constraint, now we know who has the higher status. Without shattering Dunn's, because Dunn has shown that he is tough. But why would I say I said in this instance? Because obviously only two people are talking, Dunn and Bowers, I could have written, I'd suggest you back away now, and not put I said. Why do you think I put I said there? Like, an editor might look at this and say, well, you don't need I said because there's only two people and we know who's talking. But I didn't use I said there to show who was talking. I showed it to create a beat of silence, of stillness. There's a big difference between I'd suggest you back away now and I'd suggest you back away, I said, now. That stillness, that moment, that beat, through the speaker attribution was put there on purpose. I really wanted that to show the status. So I talked about ways to raise status, allowing a sacrifice for the good of the oppressed, or turning the other cheek. You could also have someone stand up for someone with lower status. So for instance, in one of my novel writing intensive retreats, someone had written a scene where a detective comes to a crime scene and there's been a stabbing. And she walks up and she says, all right, you stab him, we slab him, take him away to the morgue. And I said, why do you have your character say that? She said, well, I wanted to show that she's tough or that she is objective at the crime scene or something. But she doesn't come across as tough necessarily. She comes across as not compassionate. And so what could you do to show that this character has compassion, to create empathy between the character and your readers, to help with identification? Well, the simple way to solve it is just have someone else say that line. So someone else says, all right, you stab him, we slab him, take him away to the morgue. And then you have your main character, the detective, walk up and say, what did you just say? This is a girl who'll never graduate from high school, who'll never get married, who'll never see the ocean. She was a real person. This is real loss. You don't treat someone that way at my crime scene. Now readers are saying, all right, yeah, you go, because she's upholding the value and dignity of human life. And so we have all of these aspects of status: slowing down, showing restraint, raising status through stillness and allowing for power. Now in our character writing conference that we have coming up at the end of October, we're going to talk more about status. We're going to dive in more deeply, not just to status, but how to create characters with even more depth. Now I'll be teaching it with David Corbett and with Susie May Warren. Our website is characterconference.com, and you can sign up now to come to the conference. It's the last weekend of October in Atlanta at the Embassy Suites near the airport. So if you fly into Atlanta, you can just take a free shuttle to the airport, stay over Friday night, and all day Saturday and Friday night are going to be conferences on characterization. It's the premier conference on characterization that you'll find anywhere in North America. So I look forward to seeing you there, to sharing more with you about status and characterization and helping you tell a better story.